Cities have been around for 4,000 years, but for the first time, we now live in a predominantly urban civilization. That's where human beings live. The way they grow is going to affect the future of that first interconnected global urban civilization. One way they grow is out, a pattern we know as sprawl. Grouped around freeways, separated by uses separated from each other, using large amounts of land to serve very small amounts of people, breaking up the landscape, destroying its value to produce food, fiber, as a wildlife, habitat, biodiversity, water recharge area. It is incredibly inefficient and damaging. And of course, another characteristic is it tends to separate people by class, that is, depending on the kind of housing they provide. And so, of course, this form of growth is very familiar to us all, and I'm sure we all know where these locations are. Of course, Washington, D.C., Vienna, Stockholm, Moscow, Manila, Buenos Aires, Cape Town, Shenyang. As noted by a previous speaker, the average density of cities has been falling rapidly as of the beginning of the millennium, about 1.7% over the last decade in developing countries and 2.2% in industrialized countries. So what we thought of as a particular North American form of development has turned out to be a kind of virus. I call it Affluenza, that is now infecting the entire globe, symbolized by private luxury automobiles. You'll notice in the background the statue of the heroic worker. On the base of the statue is a plaque, and its title is Materialism. Even in Beijing, decorate hotel lobbies with, I don't know if they're meant to explicate or terrify. These are freeway interchanges. And you can find the same thing in posh art galleries in Beijing. So what are the consequences? Well, we know one of the consequences is a warming planet, a more turbulent climate, and that does not bode well. But there is an alternative, and that is to grow in. Growing in is the policy choice of Cascadia. This is the plan for Metro Vancouver, for Central Puget Sound, for the Portland Metro region. After 35 years of effort, it's even possible to see an urban growth boundary without any lines being drawn on the map. And the logic of urban growth boundaries is now evident to many. This is from the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China as of April 2014, and from the State Council, and it directs all major cities in China to adopt urban growth boundaries over the next 2 years. So one way of growing in is to grow up, and that is a very common model, particularly represented here in Hong Kong, but you can find it in Nuuk, Greenland as well. And of course, Vancouver is a symbol of this pattern of growth in Cascadia. Even in little old Portland, we now have examples of it, and it has spread even to the suburbs of Seattle. But another way of growing in is to intensify existing use, to grow in a more incremental fashion, making better use of the land that's already urbanized, even keeping some forms like single-family homes, but adapting them to be more respectful of limited land supplies. We can also grow along the old streetcar corridors, which are now often bus corridors, commercial strips that have survived for a century, and bring back to them the modes of transportation that made them successful, like streetcars. We can serve them with buses, and we can even bike along them. So these are hopeful signs, but I guess the question is, will this pattern of urbanization be enough to endure, enough to allow our new global connected urban civilization to endure over the long term? I had a rather horrifying experience listening to a Nobel Prize winner. He was on the International Panel for Climate Change, and he told us a very compelling story about the scientific evidence for climate change. And because it was so depressing, and we weren't serving alcohol at the event, he offered us a hopeful ending, and he ended by showing us images of his old house, which was on a small suburban lot, and his new house. No energy usage. But what he also showed was it was 2,400 square feet for him and his wife, an 800-foot outbuilding, and on about 20 acres of land, 50 miles from a city. I was stunned, and so was a lot of the audience. How can a Nobel Prize winner be so incredibly blind? Because the biggest challenge facing our cities is not climate change. It is not climate change. Climate change is an aspect of the fact that we are overusing our resources, we are contaminating and depleting them. We are in overshoot in the biological term. This has been documented by the hundreds of scientists who worked on this document. And there's a small, depressing cottage industry, although thank God it's a cottage right now and not a McMansion, predicting the collapse of our civilization because we cannot sustain at our current rate of exhaustion of our capital instead of living off our income. This is pretty simply illustrated. If we assume rather conservatively that each of us only uses 4 cubic meters of material a year, that includes all the material wasted in producing the things we consume, that means that each year on our planet, it would be the equivalent of scraping off 1 meter of the surface of Vancouver Island. But if you grow at 4% a year, after 611 years, you need a new planet every year. Well, things that can't go on forever tend not to. I'm sure the proud citizens of Uruk could not conceive that their city would not endure. This is it today, a ruin in a desert. And what's interesting about the image is not the ruin, but the desert, because the desert was created by the city dwellers, by unsustainable agriculture. The very thing that fueled their prosperity doomed them. Now we are making progress in consumption. This is micro units, 200 square feet in Portland, very popular, a sign that people are more interested in how they live and not the size in which they live. Laneways, small cottage housing, many pioneered here in the Vancouver area, but I think also importantly adaptive reuse of the things we've already invested in existing buildings. I don't think it's green to tear something down and replace it with lead platinum. I think it's better to adapt what we've got and make it serve our purpose today, which is what we see around this region as well. Another hopeful sign is the sharing economy. We don't all need to have private consumption when we can share the things we need. And thank goodness there are developers now who are exploring this idea of building communities while respecting the limits of the planet. And there's people in this room who are contributing to the idea of a sustainable urbanization, sustainable urban civilization. But perhaps the most important people are not in the room, and those are the citizens. Those are the citizens we need to engage, to work with us, to live in this new world, to help us shape us, and to help implement these ideas. Because it will not happen just by having good ideas or government action, but by having demands from the public for a better way of life. And that's ultimately the promise of cities in the first place. Yes, they're places of economic opportunity, but people were drawn to them because they were incredibly stimulating, intellectually, for religious purposes, aesthetic, social interaction, and we know that social interaction actually is directly related to longevity, that it's a fulfilling life. So what I hope the young designers in this room can do is help design the cities of the future where the consumption of a rich experience becomes the substitute for the consumption of the resources that we have limited amounts of in our planet. Thank you.